Santa's been framed. And what did I use to frame Santa? Something I easily sourced at the dollar store. Find out what. So here is the finished project with a napkin that I got from Ninnysnapkins. This napkin is called Santa's Wreath, and I fell in love with it as soon as I got it. It's got 4 images, the reverse. I cut out the rough cut thing, and I'm going to use this 8x8 wood panel that I got from the dollar store. Now I'm not going to put it on the right side. I'm going to reverse it, and that is going to allow me to, you guessed it, frame Santa. So I have a lot of space on the side. I've cut this to size, and I can see that this is the perfect size for this napkin. Now I've already rough cut part of the napkin off, but I am going around with my liner brush and water cutting to get that deckled edge. I just find this gives a lot better finish. And when I'm doing a home decor piece as opposed to an art journal piece, I want to bump it up a little bit. I want it to look a little bit nicer. And this is one of the ways to get that effect. So because this is coming from the dollar store, quality isn't necessarily there. So you're going to want to give it a coat of white gesso. That's priming and sealing the wood, and it's going to help you blend the paint and do whatever else you want to do to it. You're going to make sure that that's completely dry. So now, base coat. I am taking titanium, unbleached titanium, and some white gesso, and using a makeup sponge and spreading it along the surface. This is giving kind of a cloudy effect. I don't want it one tone. I want to add some differences in there. I'm doing the sides as well, and I do the outside of the frame as well. Now I'm going to take this stencil. It's called Screen View. This is the 6x6, and it's the perfect size. And I am taking thickened gesso, but you can use modeling paste, and I'm rubbing it on along the frame. This is going to allow me to add texture to the frame and make it look even more like one of those vintage frames that have all that detailing or etched quality to it. I'm just working my way around. I'm not taking time to dry because there's a very vintage feel to the napkin. I want to play that up, so imperfect is perfect. Vintage is very, very forgiving. So I'm going around. Once I get all the way around, I am going to want to make sure that this is completely dry before I start colorizing it. The reason being, if you don't let it dry and cure a little bit, you are going to soften it when you add any wet medium. So now I'm going to colorize it using one of my favorite art supplies, my Inktense blocks. And I've chosen the one color. It has that teal that is in the napkin. And I really want to play that up. That's the same color that is in my house. And these are the colors that I am decorating my house in. So this is not going to be a gift. This is something that a home decor piece that I'm going to add to my personal collection. And that's one of the fun parts about mixed media. You can pick the perfect color scheme to go with whatever theme and decor you have. You can personalize it. So I'm working my way around, rubbing the Inktense block on there, activating it. Now, Inktense block is ink, not watercolor, even though it reacts much the same as watercolor, but it is permanent when it's fully activated and dry. And I don't want to reactivate this when I add wet medium. So I'm testing that out. The colors are great. It's bringing out the teal that is in the napkin. I'm very, very happy with what I see in that frame. Now I'm taking some white paint on a Ranger blending foam, and I'm rubbing that around on the frame area. This is knocking back a little bit of the color and bringing up some of the high points, making it look diffused and more vintage. Then to grunge it up and make it even more vintagey and bring out the browns that are in the napkin, I'm putting some brown on that makeup sponge or that blending foam and rubbing ever so lightly on the high points. This is really grunging it up, and oh, I am so happy right now with how this looks. And I'm making a mental note to myself, this color combo is to die for. I love it. So I'm rubbing it and I'm just adding more and more as I go. And again, because it's vintage, imperfect is perfect. Now I got a little bit extra brown there, so I'm coming back in with some white gesso, knocking that back. And remember, we're going for imperfection here. Now that I'm perfectly happy with the front of the frame, I am doing the sides, and I'm giving this the exact same treatment. One of the reasons I chose to do this vintage is because it's a dollar store wood panel. Now, if I was buying these in an art supply store, you get better quality. This has some splits in the wood, some imperfections. It's over sanded in places. It's cracked. Perfect for vintage. So I'm just adding that color, then coming back in with the white gesso, with the brown to grunge it up and make it all vintage. I love when the frame of my mixed media piece matches the decor piece. So now I'm using this stamp from the Faded Type. It's a Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous collection, and it's kind of old English, and I'm stamping in several places. Now I've placed the excess ply of the napkin there just so I know where that Santa is going to go, because I really don't want any of this text underneath the Santa, because when I glue the napkin down, it's going to shine through. It's going to come through, and I don't want any of that text there. So Santa's going to go there. Now I want to add a little bit more detail and play up the whole holiday winter theme. This is my Inktense block. I'm making some ink, and then I am stamping with this Snowflake Sparkles stencil from the Crafters Workshop. All the stencils that I use in today's video are from the Crafters Workshop. This is soft, it's watercolory look, it matches perfectly the napkin. Now, when you're doing the inside or you're doing a reverse wood panel, it's a little hard to get to the edges, so you kind of have to bend the stencil a little bit and work it in there to get the coverage that you want. And again, I'm not going to put any of the stenciling right behind the Santa. There's no need, because the Santa's going to be there. Now, if you get a color that's a little bright, you can take a baby wipe and wipe it off, just like I did there. You've got a little bit of time to be able to get that Inktense block off or diffuse it. And then I continue working my way around, adding more snowflakes, adding more patterning as I deem necessary. So now we've added a lot of layers, a couple layers to the background, and I'm ready to glue my Santa down. And I'm just going to glue him down with a coat of fluid matte medium underneath. Then I'm just going to lay that napkin down, smooth it with my fingers, and a coat of matte medium on top. Then I'm going to peel the bottom half and glue that down in like fashion. Just go slowly. Practice helps, and you'll avoid wrinkles. And if there are wrinkles, I think that's just going to add to the whole vintage feel. Remember that the napkin gets fragile when it's wet, so you want to have a light hand here. The colors of the napkin tend to get a little more vibrant once you put the matte medium on it. Now I want to knock back some of that patterning in the background. I want the focal image to be front and center. So I'm taking some white gesso and unbleached titanium on that makeup sponge and just patting on here and there so that the text and the snowflake stenciling little bits are showing through, but not in any solid fashion. Kind of like faded wallpaper would look. Again, playing up that vintage feel. If you take off too much, you can put that stencil back on and reapply it. Now, I wasn't sure if I put a good coat of matte medium on top of Santa, and because I want to overpaint and I want to make sure that that napkin is sealed, I am erring on the side of caution and adding a coat of fluid matte medium on top. And I'm just going to make sure that that dries. If you overpaint on an untreated napkin without putting the matte medium on, it'll wick and distort it. So now I'm going to overpaint, and how I do that is I put a little bit of gesso on the brush and I pick out one element, I kind of dab it between the brush and my fingers, and then I come back and I apply color. And either I'm using the Inktense block to do that or some watered down acrylic paints, and I use whatever the best color match is. So I'm playing up that teal. I want that teal to match my beautifully created vintage frame. So I'm just bumping up that teal a little bit to match my decor. Then I'm adding some browns. So it's a little bit of a dance. I pick a couple elements, the pine cones, add the gesso, then add the color, then go back and forth. So here I'm doing Santa's brim, and instead of the traditional white, this is a vintage. It's got brown in it, so I add the gesso, then I come in with brown, and I'm dabbing. Now you do lose some of the detail of the napkin, but I really love this painterly effect. I'm just whitening and brightening his beard a little bit with some gesso. And I just move around the image, overpainting what I feel I want to. There is no right or wrong. Sometimes I do all the elements on the napkin. Sometimes I just do select ones. Now this napkin would make beautiful handmade cards, and I have 2 napkins, so I have 7 more images, so I will be making more. I'll be making this in a similar design as a card that I will send out this Christmas. Or maybe another home decor piece. I do love this napkin, and I tend to hoard those napkins that I love. I'm afraid to use them up because they just speak to me. So here I'm doing this poinsettia. I'm putting first some white gesso on the poinsettias, staying inside the outline of the poinsettia petals. And then once that's partially dry, I will come in and colorize it, highlight it, shade it. Here I'm adding the cadmium red with a little bit of orange and the white gesso and painting it. So in the end, I've really changed the color of that poinsettia, but A, it matches my decor even more perfectly, and B, I've made it my own. Here I'm adding the red, brightening Santa's clothing and his hat. Again, my focal image, I want to be the brightest thing on the page, even though it's vintage. And to make it vintage, I come in and I shade with brown. And that just mutes those colors and takes it back into that vintage vein, because you don't want it bright, bright. So now I'm taking the brown and I am doing my version of edging the page here. I'm going around the inside of the wood panel. This grunges it up and adds a nice detail. Now I display this. You can wire this in the back and hang it on a wall. But my favorite way of displaying this is to put it in like a plate rack that I get from the dollar store. And I can display it on a table, on the coffee table, on my mantle. It will also stand by itself. Here I'm taking some black and I'm just ever so lightly giving it a tinge of black. This further makes it vintage and frames the frame. And once again, I can't tell you how much I love how this frame panel worked out. And best of all, I don't have to buy a frame for this mixed media piece because frame's included. Now I wanted to put a sentiment on here, but you could totally leave this out. I grabbed my wooden stamp or my letter stamps. I pre-stamped Warm Winter Wishes just to get the spacing. And then I'm using a combination of brown with black on that blending foam. I'm using that as a stamp pad and I'm just stamping the sentiment on there. I thought the black would be a little too harsh. Brown, definite in that vintage vein. If you stamp and it doesn't work out, grab a baby wipe. You can wipe it back as long as everything is permanent underneath and it's completely dry. You've got some playing time, which is why I like stamping with acrylic paint, not archival ink. This gives me a little bit of forgiveness. There's always one letter that I end up having to stamp multiple times. So I'm just going to finish stamping my sentiment in there. And yet again, imperfect is perfect for vintage. I'm adding a splatter of gold paint. The gold goes really well with that teal and the unbleached titanium and that muted red. Got some a bigger splatter than I want, so I'm wiping it off with my baby wipe. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you learned something that you can start using in your art. Close-ups of the finished project are at the end. I hope you love this as much as I do. Until next time, go get creative.